Hi friends, and welcome back to the last lesson of chapter 9. Today we're going to be working on estimating sums. That means we're not going to be finding exact answers, but we're going to be estimating our answers. That means we're going to be using a lot of rounding, so I want you to get those rounding brains on and ready to rumble. Working on chapter 2, lesson 9. Our big question for this chapter is, how can place value help me add larger numbers? So far we have used base 10 pieces to do some hands-on adding, which helps us with place value. We've used our place value charts to help us add. And we've used rounding. And today we're going to be rounding to the nearest 10 or 100, which is also going to help add larger numbers. Our first question says, on Monday, third grade students spent $12 in the school cafeteria. On Tuesday, they spent $17. How much more did they spend on Tuesday than they did on Monday? So the very first thing I like to do is I like to highlight super important information so that when I go back and work through the problem, it's easy for me to find and I already have that information up front in my brain. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I know that on Monday, the third grade students spent $12. I know that on Tuesday, they spent $17. And I need to find out how much more they spent. So the next thing, we need to think about the 4 steps in the 4-step plan. The first step is to understand the problem. We need to think about what we know, and we need to think about what we're trying to figure out. The second step is to plan. We're going to make a plan going into this problem, because there's nothing worse than getting into the middle of a problem and realizing I could have done this more efficiently, or I could have used a better strategy. So we're going to plan for step 2. For step 3, we're going to go ahead and solve that problem using the plan we created. And for step 4, we're going to check and see if our answer is reasonable. Does this make sense? So what do we know? This is where highlighting your information comes in super handy. We know that on Monday, the students spent $12. And we know that on Tuesday, they spent $17. So how much more did they spend on Tuesday than they did on Monday? So our next question is, what do we need to find? What do we need to find? My trick is I always look for the sentence that has the question mark. This is asking us a question, and so it's asking us to do something. So it says, how much more did they spend on Tuesday than they did on Monday? So we need to figure out how much more they spent on Monday or Tuesday than they did on Monday. How much more? And then we need to come up with a plan and solve our problem. How are we going to solve this problem? So in my brain, I know that we're going to need to subtract how much they spent on Monday from how much they spent on Tuesday. So in my brain, I think about this as on Tuesday, I know they spent $17, and on Monday, I know that they spent $12. They're asking me to figure out how much more they spent on Tuesday. So I'm going to take away the $12 they spent on Monday, and that'll leave me with just how much more they spent on Tuesday. So when I solve this problem, I'm going to subtract 12 from 17, and that's going to give us how much is left. So I'm going to go ahead and say 17 minus 12, and then solve. I know that 7 minus 2 is 5, 7, 6, 5. And I know that 1 minus 1 is nothing, so I'm not going to put anything down there. The last thing we have to do is check our answer. The way I'm going to do this one is I'm just going to flip what I did and I'm going to add it back together and see if it makes sense. So I know that if I add 5 to my 12, I should get 17. So 12 plus 5 equals 5, 6, 7, and 1. So yes, our answer is reasonable. That makes sense to me. We double checked And we know that our 12 plus 5 equals 17. So we know that they spent $5 more on Monday, or on Tuesday than they did on Monday. All right, so let's jump in. It says, is it reasonable to say that Wallace's family has traveled about 2,200 miles this year? The key word here is that word about. So this is not asking us to find an exact answer, but they're asking us, is it reasonable to say they traveled about that much? We have a chart here that tells us how much the dad traveled, how much Wallace traveled, and how much his brother traveled. So in my mind, I'm already thinking, all right, I need to add all of these miles up and see if they equal about 2,200. But if they're just asking me about, I know that I'm gonna wanna round, because I don't wanna go through all of that work to add all of these numbers up and find an exact answer if all they're asking me to do is give an estimate. So we know that Wallace's family has traveled 398 miles. We know they traveled 737 miles. And we know that the brother traveled 1,106 miles. So what do we need to find? I need to find out if the family traveled about 2,200 miles. So we have figured out step one. We understand the problem, we know what we need to do, and we have found out what we need to find. Our second step is we need to plan. So we're going to estimate the sums. We already talked about that, because we're just going to try and figure out an approximate answer. So we're going to estimate the sums, and then we're going to compare those estimates. We're going to compare the estimate they gave us in the problem to the estimate that we found when we were solving. So our third step is to solve. And they gave us our rounded numbers here. So they rounded to the nearest hundred. They rounded 1,106 down to 1,100. They looked at the hundreds place here, and the 3 told them they're rounding down to 700. And in our 398, they looked over here, and the 9 told us we're rounding up to 400. The last thing we need to do is we need to add all of these numbers together and see if the estimate we found is similar to the estimate that they gave us in the problem. So I'm going to start in the ones place. 0 plus 0 plus 0 is 0. 0 plus 0 plus 0 is 0. 1 plus 7 is 8. And 8 plus 4, 9, 10, 11, 12. So it's 12. That means that we have an extra 10 100s. So we can cash those into the bank and get an extra 1,000 out of that. And all that we're left with is 2 of those hundreds. And then 1 plus 1 is 2. So the estimated sum of 2,200 miles is the same as the estimate in the problem. They gave us 2,200 miles. So we know that this answer is reasonable because our answer is the same as the estimate that they gave us in the problem. Thanks for watching.